Hello everyone! In today's tutorial, I'll be doing a walkthrough of how I created these 4 hairstyles in Houdini. We'll go through initial scalp setups, approaching styling, resolving some problems along the way, and how to set up the hair for render. Here are some resources I used. I saw this blog or this tutorial sometime last year where this person was approaching grooming by creating different scalp zones, and I thought it was very interesting and would allow for more variation when grooming. So I decided to try this out for this tutorial. And I also took a look at some of the files by Andriy Bilichenko from this Paris HIVE last year, where he covered creating hair that was curly, creating hair that was straight, creating male hair, and also creating an afro. So these are some of the resources I used. So let's begin. Okay, so this is a walkthrough because it's grooming of hair. I'm not going to be creating every single thing from scratch, but I will show the thought process behind some of the things that I did. So for this, I used the test geometry head in Houdini. I subdivided that and I painted a hairline. This is where I wanted my hair to be. And then this I put in all here. So the first step in the grooming taught from that blog I showed was to do a Topobuild and to mirror that, fuse that together, create some scalp zone groupings, and then use this for the grooming. That way you'd be able to, for instance, select the nape and groom only that, or select the front and groom only that. So if you will be creating a Topobuild, you can use the Topobuild tool. Make sure you place it here in template geometry, and then you can just template that so you can see what you're doing. You can press Control on that and then the template will be more solid. So you can just click and create that. So if it's completely solid, you might not see it, but that's how you create that. And then if you want to just keep creating more from this, you can just left click on that edge and then it will create this template which you can just drag, and if you keep clicking it will just keep making more templates for you. When you're done, you press enter, and that's how it is. You can also move it once you've made the Topobuild if you feel like it's not the way you want it to be, and you can just move it like that, and then from there click here and you can easily just build the scalp zone. Next, I just did a poly split because I noticed a problem here. I mirror that and then fused. For the scalp zones, this is exactly as it was done in the grooming taught tutorial, just creating different groups and assigning colors to them. And at the end, we have all of these groups with all the colors. So now we have our scalp zones, and then we subdivide the scalp zones and create a ray. So this ray is just going to match the actual head template geometry exactly. And what we're doing is doing a minimum distance. Okay. So from here, we can proceed to our hair gen. I'll just put a template on the head. So from here we move to our hair gen, and once you place it into the hair gen, none of the groups are going to follow through in the hair gen. So you need to do a group transfer so you can transfer all the groups that you've added, and then you can find it here. See, here. Next thing to do is to set the length, and basically just start grooming. So when creating hair, it is important to have a reference, and this is the reference I used for my Mobwife hair. It reminds me sort of like an old style hair that's very puffy at the roots. It has a lot of volume and it's curly, but the curls are more manipulated rather than like really curly hair. So in order to do that, I've set my length to be very long, and I'm going to add a guide partition here. So for the guide partition, once you click draw parting line, it will bring up this draw curve, and then you can just draw the curve the way you would draw any curve, and then you can resample that so that it has more points to it, and then you put it into the guide groom. So for my guide groom, after doing a lot of mistakes, I discovered that the best way for me to accomplish this hair would be to do some planting. So this is how the guide groom came in for me, and then I just did a delete of everything. So for this hair, I didn't use any of the scalp zones that I had created here, but I followed the same workflow for all the hairs, just because I wanted it to be more uniform, and in case I needed it, then I would always have the scalp zones. So for the guide groom, what I did was to do a lot of planting. So I can set it to plant. I set the mode to single. The default length is 0.5, and you can put your segment count as high as you want, 60 or 30, but the reason for this is to ensure that you have enough points to manipulate as you're grooming the hair. So if I just click here, I have that, and click here, here, here. All right, and now I'll just move the next tool to sculpt, and then I just sculpt the hair like that. So because there's more points to the hair, I'm able to manipulate it more. I can switch over to the brush just to move it back a bit, not too much into the hair. And I set my ray bias to 0.03 just so it has more space to move. I go back to sculpt and brush the hair. Be sure to be careful so it doesn't go into the scalp, and then I can create some interesting curls. So just like that. And if I keep planting, so here I've done the sculpt again. If I go back to plant, so I've done like the fringe, I could plant more here, and you'll see that as you plant, the hair tries to follow the guide of what you've done. So let's say I plant only that one, but I'm not happy because it's going into the cheek. Then I can click one, select the hair, press enter, and go to sculpt, and now I'll be sculpting only this hair. I know this is more manual and you'd have to take your time to do this and brush each hair, but this is only if you have a reference and you want to match it as accurately as possible. That's what I was going for this particular hair. So if it's something that isn't as groomed or as brushed as this hair, you might not need to do this step, but if it is, then you might need to plant each hair and make sure that it's moving in the way that you want it to and following the guides that you want it to follow. So you just take your time, brush each hair, do each curl, and as you go through it, I would recommend putting it back into a hair gen, just because you want to see how much hair you have from the guides that you've planted. So you'd plant probably about this number of guides. I think this This is just about 54. And then you place it into another hair den so that you can see how much hair you're generating from the guides that you have. If you have any spots that are bald, or they don't have as many hairs to follow, or if you need more guides to ensure that the hair in this hair gen is following it directly, then you keep planting more guides. So that's what I did. I just kept planting guides and sculpting it. I did try other types like the draw, but I felt that one I'd have to draw it out and I wouldn't have as much control as I wanted for the plant. Like I could take this segment count up and probably make it like 60, but I just found that it was better for me to use the plant and then to use the sculpt. But you can use the draw if that's what you want to do. This is just how I did it for this one. Okay, so from there I just add a rest attribute. That's how the guides look like. I think they match the the reference as much as possible. And then I go back to my hair gen. I'm removing some of the guides that were intersecting the ear. I added as many guides as I could, but you see I still have like one hair that's just going into the ear. I was paying attention while making my guide groom here to do more hairs that were going over over the ear. So I was paying more attention here to do more guides that were going over the ear. But by the time I got to the hair gen, still there was just one more hair there that wasn't behaving. So I deleted that and I placed it into a guide mask. And this guide mask is the clump curl frequency. And I got this from the files that I downloaded from Andriy Bilichenko. And this is a procedure that he followed in his file. So putting that to 1 plus 1, and then doing a hair clump. Next, I am resampling my hair, and then I'm adding some frizz, not too much. Next, I am resampling and converting to NURBS curves and doing a guide collide VDB just to be sure that there's nothing intersecting and everything is out. And the reason you want to be sure of that is mainly because of when you want to simulate it. If it's intersecting on the first frame, you might have more problems than you would like. And something I did notice is when I placed it into the clump curl, my partition became less neat. And if you see, it's just like moving some of the hairs a bit. It doesn't mess it up, but it does make it, I think, a bit more realistic, in my opinion. And that's basically how I did the setup for this one. I will go into how I set it up for Sim, but I'd like to look at some of the other hairs first. So for my locks, I had this as a reference. I wanted the locks to be a bit thick, not too thin, but still very frizzy. I have locks as well, and my locks are very frizzy, especially all along the bottom or the tip of the hair. But you can see some parts of the scalp. It's not too frizzy at the scalp. It's more frizzy as the hair gets longer. So in order to do that, I did, of course, my hair gen, I did the set length, and then I went to my guide groom where I just laid down the hair in the formation that I wanted it to take. I didn't do a guide partition here. I didn't feel it was necessary, mostly because for this hairstyle, you can see the parts in the hair, but the hair is free to move wherever it needs to. So I just laid down the hair how I wanted it to. Some parts are shorter than the others, and I did a guide collide so I would be sure nothing was going into the hair, into the skin. That's my VDB. And then I did the clump curl frequency, which I'm not necessarily sure this was necessary for this hair, but I kept it either way. And here's how I did the partition for the the guides for the locks. So what I wanted for this sweep node was to have extra guides for each guide hair that I had already planted. And for each of those guides, I wanted them to frizz up, and that was going to give me the appearance of the locks like I wanted. But if I did it straight from the sweep node like that, what I would get would be this, because every extra guide that was planted for the original guide that I have now has the same ID. So it's clumping based on the ID, and everything is just frizzing all together. So what I did instead was to delete the initial ID and to reassign the ID based on the primnum. And if I did that and I put that into my hair clump after, what I get is, since each new primitive has a new ID, when it's frizzing, every single one is frizzing in different ways, but it's still maintaining the clump space that I want, and that's how I'm able to get that frizz for my locks. After this, it's not that much different from any other hairstyle. I add a varied length because I don't want everything to be exactly the same length. I don't believe that looks realistic, even just based off my own hair. And then I am making it smoother by doing the conversion to NURBS curves and resampling it as well. And that's basically how I did that for the locks. I will show how I did it after the simulation just to add a bit more variation, but now I'd like to go to the Wolfcut. Okay, so for the Wolfcut, this is the reference that I have. What I realized is that the front pieces are a bit shorter, and then when we move on to this hair, which is by the nape, this is longer, and when we move more towards the back, it's shorter at the back. If we take a look at another reference that I used, you can also see from this that the hair which is around here is shorter, and the ones which are at the bottom are much longer. So this was very helpful for styling. Always check your references. And for this one, I maintained the groups because they were very useful in controlling which part of the hair would be short and which part of the hair would be longer. So this time when I went into the guide groom, I wasn't deleting, I was simply trying to sculpt and ensure that the length I wanted for every part of the hair was correct. And when you look at this guide groom initially, it looks kind of silly, but by the time I have gone into the hair clump, you can see that you can see that it's actually what I want it to be. So for this guide groom, what I did, I'll just make an extra guide groom because I don't want to mess up the one I have. Okay, so for this one, I would, for instance, click the front, which is this part. This is something that is really short, and then I would take my sculpt brush and sculpt that this way. So the front is going to be very curly, so I want to lift it up a bit from the head, and then I'm going to go to my cut brush. I'm just going to give her a nice trim like that. You can imagine the cut brush is like a scissors, basically exactly what you see in the guide groom. And you can imagine you're at the salon and someone is cutting your hair. You'd cut it more like that, yeah, so it'd be at more of an angle. And of course we can still move it a bit to this side with our brush, and there you have it. You can add more guides with this. The only thing is that they won't respect the grouping system that you have from above. So I would do that once I'm done with all of my sculpting with all the other parts of the hair. So next I could look at, I believe it's the temples, and do a nice sculpt. And for this one, I would probably, I believe, mirror the brush. Yep. So I can just draw those down and then do a nice like that. And mostly there wasn't a lot of styling for this one, just have it like that. And next I could look at the nape, which is at the back like that, and just put everything down. Then do nice brush like that. And maybe I don't want to mirror it anymore. With the references I had, a lot of times the hair was a bit more separate at the back, so I can just do that separation like that and make sure it's not flying off like that. And so that's how you just carry on for the guide groom until you have something more like this. So you can observe for all of the hair here, I have shorter hairs that I've bunched up like that. Even the ones at this side are a bit longer. And here is also a bit longer. It sort of goes in this direction down. And when I put that into my hair gen, just so I have a bit more hair, it gives me this. Then I do a guide collide VDB because some of the hair was going into the skin. And then I do a guide mask here for clump curl. And I place that into the first clump curl. And I go into the second clump curl, which is going to give me this curling. So for this one, I did a high frequency of curls. I wanted it to be very curly. And that's basically how I did this. So the important thing for this wolf cut is the grooming. The important thing for most of the hair is the grooming. If you can get the grooming right, then the other things are just going to give you variation and how you can make it look more realistic and things like that. And so for this one, I'd add extra frizz. I'd also give it some variations in length because I don't believe that hair is going to be the same length all through. And then I just go back into the null, and that's how it's supposed to look. So for the afro, there are different types of afro, and the curl pattern that I was going for was something that is more 4C, where the hair is more coily than curly. This sort of hair, if you examine the structure of this hair, this is the type of hair that looks like the type of locks that I styled as well. Hair that if it's being converted to locks, then it's going to be more frizzy into itself. The hair is going to coil more into itself. And so that was the inspiration for this hairstyle. So for this, I followed more what Andriy Bilichenko had done in his tutorial, with just using the blog as well for any group transfers that I might need to do. But after some time, I decided to just follow what Andriy Bilichenko did until he got to more of the coding aspect where he used some more Vex. I didn't use as much here. So for what he did was to make a box which went into a guide mask, then did a bend from that. For this, I believe my bend was not as extreme as his. And also I had some more bend as well like this. Put that into the hair gen and then do some curling here like this. So for me, I focused more on making these curls without Vex and making them more with a frizz. So this setup is very similar to what he did, and I can just go into what I have here. So this is the initial cache that I have. Yeah, just like that. So this head isn't moving at the moment, which I will get into, but basically the hair moves like this, right? So we have this here, and I followed what he did when he went into his hair gen. He added more hair, and did like so the hair was completely straight here, and he did a guide mask which was based on the initial guides. and then put that into the hair clump to get the clump that we have afterwards. And then do different guide masks. So for here, I have one guide mask, which is frizz A, and I have another guide mask, which is frizz B. And then for my guide mask, I said if the guide mask is frizz B, then put that into a group which is called fuzz. And then I promoted that to primitives. So I take that group promote and I promote it. And then I go into making more frizz, another set of frizz. But by the third frizz, I'm only doing that for the fuzz and just adding some more frizz to just the hairs that were within that group. And if I did that, what I got was a more coily hair, but was also more frizzy, kind of resembles the way my hair used to look like before I had locks. And basically that's how I made these 4 different styles. Okay, so going into the simulation, I will be starting from here, from the Guide Collide VDB. So this is for the Mobwife hairstyle. So this is what I had, and now I want to simulate it. So I'm going to need a guide deform, and this is what I have here. Now I realized several things at once. The scalp that I was using for grooming is this scalp, but when I want to simulate it, I want to use this head for simulation, just so the hair can interact with the neck and not just go into itself. It's not necessary, but that's just what I wanted to do. So in order to do that, and in order for me to have hair, in order for me to have the group, which I'm going to use to scatter the hair in the hair gen, what I did was to take, for instance, this scalp and just animate it. I did the same animation for the head. And then I created an attribute called scatter hair. For the scalp that I'm using, the attribute is going to be all over the scalp. If I just look at it here, it's just going to be all over the scalp. And then for that, I'm transferring that attribute to my head. And then that's what I'm going to put within the guide deform. I do the same thing for the static hair that isn't moving. I place that into my rest skin, and this animated one goes into the animated skin. But for the hair itself, I am grouping the roots by using the vertex prim index and the vertex num. That just picks the exact roots of the hair so that it can be pinned down. I also have another mask, which is frizz, which I did here. I created a box and I used that to create this mask frizz attribute. Now for that mask frizz, that's what I have here, which I'm putting it in points, and I'm saying if it's in mask frizz is greater than 0.5, then I want that to be in the group A. I do a bit of grouping here, and the grouping is everything except for A. Next, I add some glue, and I do a group combine, which is going to combine everything apart from my roots and apart from A. And finally, I take it to my vellum hair. Now, if I visualize the thickness, this is sort of where I'm looking at for the hair, to avoid having too many intersections. And I put that into the solver. There isn't much that is done here, but if you want more information about this, then I suggest watching the Andriy Bilichenko's video, and because there he did some more constraints for the glue to be sure that that part of the hair wasn't going to move as much. And this is what I cached to give me the hair I have. So I really like the way the hair swings back here. It's very dramatic. And this is what goes into my hair gel. So I don't know, I don't really like this white, so I'm going to change this to dark because I can't see otherwise. And so for this one, this is how I have the hair. If I take it back, this is how it looks like. It's still pretty distinct, like with the clumps. And I can give it some variation by setting the length differently. This really helps the tips of the hair to be not so uniform. Okay. And then I do some more masking of the frizzes. And here I just want to talk about this again. So the reason why I did the scatter hair transfer was because this head does not have the attributes of where the hair is supposed to be. And I've been using this scalp, which has all of these attributes. And I needed to transfer that so that the hair could scatter properly. If I don't have this, the hair doesn't scatter properly. I can show that if I just do this. So you can see it respects the hairline of what I want. If I do that, there's no hair. And if there is hair, then it's not going to respect the hairline. So if I do that, if I do that and I just take this out, I take that out, you can see it doesn't really respect the hairline that we've taken so much time to create. So I'm just going to undo what I did. And just put it like that. So now I know it's scattering only where I want it to be scattered. And then of course I do a frizz. The first frizz, which is for my entire hair. Like that. And then I go back to making a guide collide. And here I'm also making a guide mask. So here I'm making a guide mask, which is just set on the curve mask. So what I wanted to do is to select the hairs as closest to the roots, because for my blonde hair I wanted to have darker roots. And then I'm converting that so that it's less blocky, less triangulated, and more recent. And then I did a retime as well, just to give me this. So by the time I'm here, since I've done a retime, that's not going to show up for now, but this is how the hair is supposed to look like at the end. And I'll just also go over the setup for the Locs as well. This is the cache I have from the Locs. Don't mind the head. The head doesn't move, so it looks weird. Yeah, that's what I have. Yeah. And so for that, that goes into the hair gen. It looks pretty nice already. I like the way it does the roots, because it gives me these nice partings. And I just need to do a couple more things, like adding more frizz, because here I can see the curl pattern, or I can see the frizz distinctly, and I don't want to see it. So what I did was to have some hairs that I call fly away. So I just did a simple grouping using a random mask, and for that I also set up varied lengths to this one. And then I did a guide bend that was focused on the flyaway hair. So what that just did was to separate some of the hairs for me from each of the clumps, and that just gave me more of a fuzzy look to the hair. And next, of course, I need to add my frizz back, also to the flyaway hairs. So you can see that's giving me more volume to the hair. The curl pattern is less distinct. And next I added something I called budding. If I look at it, that's just around here, around the roots of the hair. And next I'm adding another frizz, which is going to take care of the budding. Or rather, I'm adding the budding, so the white part of the budding is around the tips of the hair, and the frizz I'm adding is just to the tips of the hair. So the tips of the hair become more fuzzy, and they begin to look more like the locks that I wanted. So that's how we have the tips now. Even just looking here, like I really like the pattern that it makes on the scalp. It makes it look more realistic to me. And next I'm just adding some more frizzing to the hair, making it look a bit more natural and less like it's been made in a computer. And then finally, of course, similar to my blonde hair, I do an attribute called tips, I believe. Yep. And I put that into an attribute promote, and this is why I'm going to use to dye the tips of the hair as well. And basically that's how I go through each of the hairs. I've covered the afro, and for the Wolfcut it's very similar as well. Well, now it's too dark so I can't see it. Let's change that back to light. So this is what I have for the hair. You can see, because of all the groupings that we would have done in the before we simulated, some of the hair is more like loose, some of the hair is more following the pattern of the hair. And for that I just put it into, so for this one I actually did a similar thing to the locks, where I'm setting variations in length, and I also created this guide mask as well, a random guide mask for the flyaways, and I set those to bend, and so that's what really creates this distinct hairs that are flying off. And I did the same thing, basically just like adding different guide masks and things like this, and that's what got me the hair in the end. So this is how I did my setup for all the hairs. And finally I will just go a bit over how, I'll just go over a bit of how I rendered this as well. Okay, so rendering was actually pretty straightforward. For my Wolfcut hair, all I just needed to do was to put the calmer hair. And for this one, so the melanin controls how black or how light it's going to be. I like to just use this one with the very low path trace samples, just to check the colors of the things. So if I change this to XPU now, then we can just check what that melanin is doing. So for this one, it's 512. So I'm going to take all the redness out for now. And you see we have something that looks more like a blonde, right? If I take it to this, it's going to look almost white. And if I take it here, it's going to look extremely black. I kind of like the black, but I wanted to do a sort of red or more like a ginger hair. So if I take this to 0, that's how it looks. And even if I add redness to it, it's not going to show up until I start adding the melanin back to it. And you notice if I go like really extreme, then it begins to look more like, oh, that's like a dark ginger. And if I take it to the end, it's looking more like a brunette sort of hair. So I'll just leave this back at my 512. Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted. I did change some of the specular, so I didn't want this to be too bright, too shiny, and I wanted to randomize the roughness. I also wanted to add this at first, but I felt it made the hair look a bit unrealistic, so I just took that out. So yep, this is what I have for this hair. And I can just show once more for my locks. So for my locks, this is how it came in, right? And I'll just take a look at this one. So for the locks, what I did was to bring in that value tips using this note. I placed this on a comma ramp constant, and I sort of dyed the hair. So if it's white, then it doesn't do anything, but if it's not white, then it goes to this color. So if I just look at that, you can see it's more like the ends of the hair are like that. If I just copy that and I take this to white, then you can see it doesn't do anything. That would be the color of the hair, right? But if I change this to a color, then it sort of dyes the rest of the hair, and then it leaves the tips as the original color. So for this one, I wanted it to be more like blonde. Yeah, so that's how I set that. And I'll just take a look at the Mobwife as well. So it's the same thing. I brought this in, the roots, and I set that on a ramp constant. And instead, what I want this time is for the roots of the hair to look like that. So I felt it made it look more realistic if from the tips of the hair we have that sort of darker root color. I don't think this is true for everyone's hair, but I felt it looked good for this hair. I like the way the sun just like hits the these parts of the hair. So that's basically how to do that. And for the afro, I didn't do anything different to the hair. I just did similar to the Wolfcut. I just added a little bit of redness and added the melanin to be at 1. I also made it a bit thicker, so the thickness scale does affect how the hair looks like. If you take this down, the hair is going to be more, is going to be lighter. See, it looks more like a light brown. And if I take this really high, it's going to look basically black. So if I take this really low, then the hair begins to look blonde. So you just kind of have to find a point where you're happy with what you have. And that's basically how I did all of the hairs. So that is the end of the tutorial. I've included the project file in the description, which will contain all the hairstyles pre-sim and one hairstyle post-sim. I'm not including the caches because they're too huge. So let me know what you think in the comments, and if you have any hairstyles that you want to try, please try them out and tag me, let me know, let me see it, tag me on my LinkedIn, and I'll see you guys next time.